Hello ladies and gentlemen, let's go on to our second problem of the day, level ground. Now, level ground requires an input file of groundin.txt and an output file of groundout.txt. So let's put that into our AIO folder, a new file of groundin.txt and another file of groundout.txt. Okay, and then it also gives us a template file called ground.py. So let's start up a file called ground.py over here, ground.py. That will be our Python file. Now ground.py will copy over the suggested template over here. Okay, and then once again, we will change our groundin.txt into the path of our computer's file. So we'll just put the computer files path over here, remembering to put double slash for all the punctuation marks because Python doesn't recognize a single slash. So we'll do the same thing with ground out, the output file ground out. Okay, over here. Now, let's take a look. Now that we have done the template file, okay, why don't you try on your own first before we analyze the problem and the solution. Okay, let's take a look at the problem of level ground. Okay, the Australian marathon team is planning a race. The race is divided into n segment, and the I segment has altitude of AI kilometers. Each race must take place over a block of segments, and segments must have the same altitude. Longer races at high altitude are more intense. The intensity of a race is a product of the number of length of the segment and altitude. A race with 3 segments with altitude of 2 km has intensity of 6. So let's take a look at the altitude that's given to us. All right. Now let's say that these are the altitudes of the terrain. Then we can hold a race on this segment over here. So here will be the race. Okay, now a race who have 3 segments and altitude is 2, 3 segments of altitude 2. So the total intensity is 6, intensity 6. So then in that case, the answer will be 6. Now let's take a look at some of the sample inputs. Sample input 2 will be 10, 10, 10. So the altitude intensity will be 30. Now sample input 3 is very interesting. It's 1, 1, 1, and then 4. So you would assume that maybe having a race here would be better, but actually the race should be held over here. So watch this. Over here, this intensity is only 3, but over here, this intensity is 4. So now our program will need to have two ways of doing things. Number one, to find out the segments, to split the race into segments of the race. And then number two, to find the intensity of each segment. And then after that, to return the highest intensity. Answer will be equals to the highest intensity. Okay, so I'll leave you to try on your own first, okay, and then later on I'll show you the answer. Okay, let's discuss the answer for the marathon question, the running question, okay? So this is the template that's provided to us by the Australian Informatics Olympiad. N is the number of segments, A contains the altitude of the segments, and answer is the answer. So first of all, they will open up the input and output files and read the value of n. So n is basically going to be an integer. Now next, they'll read the altitudes by putting a into a list. So a is going to be a list. For example, for scenario 4, a will be a list 1, 1, 1, 4. So this will be A. So you can expect that there will be a list of integers inside this altitude file A. Now, what is our concept for this answer will be, now number one, we need to break the race into segments, okay? And then next we need to find the intensity of each segment. Now how do we compare segments? Let's take a look at this race, which is 1114, 1114. Okay, so the easy way is to take a look at this segment and then take a look at this segment and see whether it's the same height as the previous segment. Okay, so we start off with the second segment of the race and see whether it's the same as the first segment. Now, if they are the same, then they are considered the same segment. Then we look at the third segment and then we see whether it's the same as the second segment. And if this is the same as the second segment, then it's also considered the same. So let's take a look at how we're going to achieve that. Now, we use I in the range I to length of A. So let's say the length of A is 4. Then I in the range 1 to 4. Now remember that this is index number 0, 1, 2, and 3. So by saying that, look for the index number of number 1, meaning that we'll start comparison from this point onwards. Now, if the altitude of the index number 1 is the same as the altitude of the index number 0, then the segment length will increase by 1. So over here we started off with a default segment length of 1 because the shortest race segment is only one segment long. Now, so what this means is that if this first thing that we see is the same as the previous one, then the segment length will increase to 2. Okay, now then we multiply out the intensity. Okay, intensity will be the segment length, in this case 2, multiplied by 1. And if this intensity is greater than the maximum intensity that we have encountered so far, then the maximum intensity will be the new intensity. But what is the maximum intensity? Why don't we set the maximum intensity to the first element in the list? In this case, the maximum intensity will be 1. Okay, so now this has a intensity is equals to 2. So now it will replace 1. So let's move on. Now we go on to the next segment and then we check, is it the same as the second segment? Yes, it is the same. So the segment length now will be 3. So segment length now will be 3. Intensity now will be 3. And since this intensity is more than the previous maximum intensity, so the max intensity will be also equals to 3. Now I wrote all this out just for debugging. Okay, so don't have to write this out if you want. Now what happens if we look at the next segment and the next segment is different from the previous segment? So if A is not equals to A plus, so now we look at 3, this altitude is 4, which is not the same as before. So if it's not the same as before, then the intensity will now be equals to this segment. So we now set the intensity to be equals to 4. And then if we reset the segment length back to 1, that means to say now we're starting a new segment. Okay, so we set the segment length back to 1 again. Now if the intensity is greater than the maximum intensity, then the maximum intensity will be updated to 4. This allows us, okay, so if the next segment is also 4, it allows us to start a new segment altogether again and update the new intensity file. Now this is sufficient, okay, to deal with the situations that are given to us in AIO. So why don't you try putting this in, okay, and see what answers you get.